which means it's 1 o'clock and we can start,
Yeah,
dear Jasper.
yes, we
Okay.
can start.
Well, if you can switch your camera off, thank you. Okay, dear candidate, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Hello, everybody. Today, I would like to talk to you about my PhD defense and my PhD thesis, aspects of time for recognizing human activities. All right. So what is the research question? It is often said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. If this is true, does that mean that a video worth 1,000,000 of words? Let's see. I'd like you to look at this picture and try to give a guess what this person is doing. Of course, you can maybe you can recognize that this person is a sportsman in a track and field sport, but you might not very well understand what he's going to do or attempt later on. If I show you more pictures like this one, it's clear now that he's attempting a high jump, but still you cannot tell if he will succeed or fail in his attempt. I gave you more pictures over time in a form of a video, and then a clear picture is painted in your head. This person has succeeded indeed in his attempt, and he's so happy about it. So what is the difference between a mere image or even a collection of unordered images and a video? So if there is any difference or any fundamental difference, it would be the following. An image can tell many stories. It has no end to it has no limit to the stories you can tell about an image. Similarly for a collection of images. But a video, it tells a very precise, ordered, and very well detailed described story. So why is that difference, or what is this difference is attributed to? Verily, it is attributed to time. So time is the single most important difference between a single image and a video. And because of that, we would like to understand time more. But you might want to answer why understanding time and why understanding videos in the first place. Why do we need to understand them? There are many plausible answers to this question and many motivations as well. Arguably, one of them is that as we speak now, every 1 minute, there's more than 500 hours of video content uploaded on YouTube, let alone other platforms. So this thesis focus on understanding the aspects of time in videos in order to enable better understanding and recognizing the visual content in videos. So what is the contribution of this thesis? We start by chapter 2 in the thesis, and it's about the past and the future in time. So I may give you some videos about an activity, a human activity like snowboarding. Then you will memorize these videos, and now you know what a snowboarding means. I might also give you other video examples of another activity called skateboarding. This is the past. Now in the future, I would ask you, do you recognize a novel human activity called board trick? You might say yes, because you have seen something similar. That's a skateboarding. Another example is you can fit wall tiles, remove drywall, and all under the umbrella of renovating your home. So in the future, I might ask you, do you recognize home renovation, what it looks like? You say yes. I've seen fitting wall tiles and seeing removing dry walls before, so I can recognize very well this human activity. It has never seen before. So all in all, we discuss in this chapter that the past experience can help very well in the future. The second chapter, we ask ourselves, is time structured? And if so, what is the ideal structure of time? And what are the properties of this structure? Take, for example, in this chapter, we restrict ourselves to what is called complex human activities. And these are the activities that takes up to half a minute to happen. This is in a stark contrast to the atomic actions that take only a few seconds to happen. So we define three properties for these complex human activities. They are long range. They consist of building blocks called atomic actions. Their temporal extent is different, and they require temporal dependencies or temporal modeling in order to understand them. In the following chapter, we saw already in the previous chapter that indeed time in videos have structure. So in this chapter, we ask ourselves, what does the ideal structure look like? So we argue that graph is the ideal structure to represent video, to represent human actions and events in videos. Why is that? I give you video exemplars of a complex human activity like preparing your coffee. It differs from one person to another. How do you prepare your coffee? But arguably, a graph representation is very consistent regardless of how you prepare your coffee. That's because in a graph representation, the node of the graph stands for the most discriminant building blocks that you do in order to achieve such a human activity, like picking up your coffee, pouring sugar, and the edges of the graph stands for the relationship between these atomic actions or building blocks. In the following chapter, chapter number 5, we ask a very interesting question. Is time order or unordered in videos? So we are talking about permutation. It might be the case that for short range activities, doing a high jump, that is very ordered and has a very strong temporal pattern. But this is not the case for long range activities. If you prepare your dinner, by how many ways you're going to prepare it? There are many ways. There is not a single correct way to prepare your dinner. The last chapter, we ask ourselves a very interesting question. So all through the previous chapters, we process the entire video, we process the entire data, but we don't pay attention what is more important than the other. That is the question in this chapter, the gating of time. Gating of time can happen in short range activities to focus on the most discriminant segments of the activity and discard the least discriminant. As you can see here, when you throw the disc, the introduction doesn't matter, and the celebration after that doesn't matter. What does matter the most is the activity itself. Similarly, in long-range activities, gating happens in a slightly different fashion. You have two activities here, cooking food and washing dishes, but the segment where you pick up the food from the cupboard is important only when you cook food. It is of almost no importance when you are washing the dishes. So importance here is conditional or relative, and it depends on the action at hand. With that, I would like to conclude my talk with three main conclusions. The first is that we have advocated for building temporal modeling methods that are structure aware. This is of a great importance if you want to understand human actions in videos. But you cannot do so unless you understand in the first place what are the properties of time, because you are going to build later model or methods that represent these properties of time, and we call them aspects of time. Last but not least, we know that there are 3 ingredients for understanding videos. The 3 ingredients are: what is the learning task, what are the methods you are going to use, and what are the data set to learn from. I propose to you the future for these ingredients of video representation learning. So we have to focus more on multimodal, proposing and inventing multimodal methods rather than single modal methods. We have to invest more on unsupervised learning as a task to learn, to understand videos. And last but not least, we have to be bold enough and courageous enough to now address the uncurated large-scale data sets instead of small-scale curated video data sets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to ask everybody to switch on the camera again. And everybody is present again. Dear Chair, the floor is yours.
Esteemed candidate, are you prepared for defending your thesis?
Yes, I am prepared.
Okay, then may I invite you to read your opening sentence?
By authority of the Rector Magnificus and the doctorate board of this university, I shall, during this hour, in order to obtain my doctorate, publicly defend my thesis entitled Aspects of Time for Recognizing Human Activities. I entreat all those who wish to voice criticism of the contents of this thesis to do so in a truthful and lucid manner, so as to provide an opportunity for an ordered exchange of views.
Thank you. At the start of the ceremony, I like to speak a word of welcome to the one visitor from outside the University of Amsterdam, strengthening our committee. That visitor is Professor Shah from the University of Central Florida, who had to get up at an, for him, extremely early time because there is a 7-hour time difference between Florida and our place. So thank you for your willingness to contribute, and I now immediately invite you to open the discussion by posing the first question. You're still muted.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much, esteemed candidate. Congratulations on doing very good work for your PhD thesis. This was the ahead of its time, the work you have put together, and lots of interesting aspects of these actions, recognition you have addressed. The storyline and problem formulation are creative. This clearly outlines the specific aspects and the crucial role in problem solving, along with proposing new direction for future works. The writing is comprehensive and backed with analysis. So I have first question about your chapter on the zero exemplar event detection. This was 2017 paper. I think this was probably the first paper addressing this issue in the activity recognition. Now, as you know, the field is moving very fast, and there's lots of work, in particular transformers and multimodal learning and so on. So my question is, if you had to solve this problem today, what are the things, new things you're going to do? What are the things you will still maintain in your approach?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks very much for your question. It's an interesting question indeed. So this research, there are two main aspects of it. the multimodal learning and the zero-shot action, zero-shot learning. Multimodal learning, I can see that transformer methods as a general toolbox to learn from single modality or even multimodalities can be very useful in such case. So maybe a good answer to your question is to involve transformers in modeling the multimodals of such a method. I mean the textual and the visual. So the second part of my answer has to do with the zero-shot part. Yeah, well, I've mentioned already that transformers can be used for multimodality. What about other recent works? There is recently a very interesting line of work with the unsupervised learning, that is the contrastive learning, and it has shown tremendous progress and success in image understanding a few years ago, and recently this year and last year in video understanding. So I can see contrastive learning plays a big role in such a method, because principally they are the same, unsupervised learning or zero-shot learning. And with that, I conclude my answer.
Okay, thank you. So to follow up on that, you do use the contrastive loss in this chapter also. Is it correct?
That is true. That is yes and no. So we use it only to learn a metric manifold, but not in the way it's used to regress to two views of the features as it's used in unsupervised learning nowadays. So in principle, yes, but in the practical wise, no.
Thank you, esteemed candidates. Another follow-up on this chapter. So you have looked at zero-shot learning where you don't have any example, the video example. So how would you change your method if you have, say, one or few examples with this text description, which has been also called one-shot or the few-shot learning?
Yeah, that highly esteemed opponent. That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I thought about it, and a very straightforward approach is what is called fine-tuning. So that is one of the go-to approaches if you have a few shots labeled of your dataset. So that can be very rarely used in this case. Yeah, so the model after the initial phase of pre-training on the external dataset, it can be further fine-tuned using these few shots. But careful considerations in terms of the learning numbers of layers being fine-tuned and the learning rate being used in the fine-tuning process has to be paid for the fine-tuning process to be a successful process.
Okay, thank you. So continuing on, I have a question about your Videograph. There you have an interesting way that you come up with the graph and these nodes with latent representation and kind of give a structure of the activity. But at the end, you actually don't recognize these sub-actions. At the end, you just say, this is what action it is, looking at the whole video. So I think that is kind of recurring in your work, even though your representation is pretty rich. But why you do not look at like multi-thomos as a temporal localization, where you localize each sub-action? What are your thoughts if you had to do that? How would you proceed?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks very much for your question. It's a very interesting question indeed. So I agree with you that the task we addressed in Videograph is the classification. I would like also to mention that the labels in this task was a single label per the entire video. So it was a single label classification. So one part of the answer, my answer to your question, is that we were strictly limited to the what type of task we are addressing. In this regard, it was single label classification of long range activities. And the second part of my answer is that we understood, or we were motivated to build a graph structure as a proxy to solving this problem. So instead of learning a feature representation right away, we thought that it's better off, we are better off to learn a middle way representation that is more rich, and then condense it later for the sake of classification. I would like also to address your last part of the question. What about the multi-Thomas learning, multi-Thomas data set, and the temporal localization as a task? I completely agree with you that the model can be rethought in order to address other tasks, namely multi-label classification and atomic action detection, like in multi-Thomas. That's one part of your last bit of the question. And also to address other tasks, like you mentioned, very good suggestion indeed, the temporal localization, which unfortunately we did not address in this chapter. So to wrap up, yes, in Videograph we addressed the classification, but that does not mean that the model can be ultimately restricted only to this task. It can be reconfigured to address other tasks like temporal localization. And the same for other data sets like multi-Thomas. In this regard, in my opinion, we will still retain the video, the graph representation part, and figure out the other part of the classification or detection.
I hope you're satisfied with the answer.
Yes, I'm satisfied.
Okay, then the discussion will be continued by Dr. Habibian from our own institute.
Yeah, esteemed candidate, I read your thesis with a great pleasure and pleased to see how fundamental properties of time has been baked as inductive biases into a wide range of modern machine learning modules like 3D convolutions, graph neural networks, and self-attention, and which is very interesting and quite diverse. I really like that. And still I have a few questions as follows. And my first question is about chapter 6, time gates, that uses two different backbones, and the light one to select time steps, and then a heavy backbone to do the classification. And I wonder if it is possible to remove the light backbone and train the selector directly on some intermediate layers of the classification backbones. And do you have any thought on that?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for showing your interest in our work, and thanks for enjoying reading the thesis, and most importantly, thanks for this interesting question. In some of the technical details I would like to mention in order to address this question, that is the comparison, the computational cost comparison between the heavyweight and the lightweight. I would like to mention that the heavyweight is a very compact single image CNN. So it's image-based CNN, 2D CNN. And one of the heavyweights we used is a very deep, very costly 3D CNN. So if in this case, the heavy CNN of the choice is the 3D, I would like to argue that the cost of a single layer, computational cost of a single layer in the 3D will outweigh the entire computational cost of the entire lightweight 2D CNN. But the second part of my answer to your question, you are right. We can somehow do the gating or do the time step selection process based on preliminary features of the heavyweight, only if the heavyweight was somehow not very heavy enough. And that was indeed in our experiments that we use not so heavyweights, namely 2D CNNs, two different choices of CNNs as far as I remember. So I agree with you, that looks like a very promising direction, only we have to pay attention to what exactly the heavyweights we are doing.
Yeah, it's clear. Thanks for the explanation. And my next question is about chapter 5, about the actually it's a recurring concept which comes also with different names throughout the thesis, like node attention or concept kernels. But in chapter 5, in permutation invariant convolutions, I think it becomes a bit more clear that different from self-attention, PIC uses some independent key and values, and which shows to be quite effective. Some key and values which are independent of the input compared to self-attention, actually different to self-attention. And this improvement is compared to self-attention is attributed to some weight sharing, which is happening across time steps in this new model. And I wonder, do you have any insight on why this weight sharing is helpful, and whether it can improve self-attention in general, maybe to other tasks beyond long-range activity recognition, like action classification, language modeling, and so on?
Esteemed opponent, thanks very much for this insightful question. It has two parts. The first of which, so Bick wrote about improvement in performance. What are these improvements attributed to? Are they because of the keys and values or the weight sharing? I would like to answer that the weight sharing, the importance of weight sharing depends on the context of the visual information we are trying to classify. So we showed we stressed on the following points in the chapter, that weight sharing is a very fundamental ingredient when it comes to recognizing complex human activities, because not all the parts of the complex human activity are important. So in this regard, the weights, which actually acts like detectors, can only focus on detecting the most discriminant part. But if the weights were conditioned, like the typical transformer, were conditioned on the input, then the output of the transformer might be corrupted because of the input is not discriminant in the first place. So that was the reason we use weight sharing. And this is very much in principle to the already well-established convolutional kernels. They are detectors with the weight, with the shared weights. As for the keys and values, we are not the first to use separate keys and values. The typical transformer used in natural language processing or even computer vision recently also use keys and values. What does not use keys and values is the typical convolution network, convolutional kernel. It is just keys. So the same weights is used for detecting and re-representation as well. Only the typical transformer use different keys and values. Now to the second part of your question, how would this improve other tasks like language? There are some recent works right after we exerted effort in doing the research and writing this chapter. During the research in this chapter, there are some follow-up works in natural language processing that stress on the importance of weight sharing, because up until then, the dominant approach of using the kernels in transformers in natural language processing is that the output of the transformer layer is conditioned on the input. So further follow-up works have stressed on the importance of having weights, shared weights, not conditioned on the input, so as to be more successful in detecting the most discriminant parts of this sentence and discarding the least discriminant part.
I hope that this was a satisfactory answer.
Yes, it is.
Okay, then we will continue our discussion with the next opponent, which is Professor Welling from our own institute.
Esteemed candidate, thank you very much for a wonderful thesis. I read it with a lot of interest on a fascinating topic, time and human activities. And you seem to master the full spectrum of machine learning tools, all the way from conditional computing to transformers. Of course, I like to see that. So congratulations on all of that. I do have some questions. And the first question is on figure 24 and the text around that on page 54 in your thesis. And you show there that you convolve both over time as well as over factors or concepts. Now, time is a structured one-dimensional manifold, if you want, Euclidean manifold. But these factors, these concepts seem to be unordered sets. So why does a convolution make sense?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks very much for your interesting question and insightful question indeed. And also thanks for the praise you paid for our thesis and the research we conducted. So, it's plausible. And conclusions apply to notes or concepts which are not plausible. Yes, so let me repeat the question so I make sure I understand it. You asked about why it looks, in your opinion, that it is plausible that we are applying convolution over time, but not so much plausible that we are doing so over the nodes or concepts. Let's just agree on have one terminology, the nodes.
Yes.
It does not looks very plausible to you. My answer is graph convolution networks. They are guided by what is called the binary nodes. So if you have a graph, you have the adjacency matrix, which states very clearly which node is connected to which. But what if the adjacency node was missing? Then you have what is called the fully connected graph. And a fully connected graph in principle is not much of a difference than two successive fully connected layers. If you consider the connections between two fully connected layers, that resembles self-attention. So I want to say that if you would like to model the entirety of connections between nodes, which looks more plausible, you end up with a fully connected graph and much more information to learn. In our problem here, one of the key restrictions is that we don't have a node edge annotation. So the adjacency matrix is entirely missing. We don't have annotation for it. So if we apply fully connected graph, it would be very hard for the network to learn the good indicative weights for the entire edges. That is why we sparsified this adjacency matrix by only modeling nodes within a certain neighborhood. And this is done by applying convolution over the node dimension, which is not much of a difference than a weighted sum of the neighboring nodes. Of course, by neighbor, I mean the size of the kernel of the convolution over the node dimension.
Yes, I understand. So you're saying it's a computational consideration, but but who you choose as neighbors is fairly arbitrary in this sense, right?
Yeah, that's another very good question indeed. I wouldn't say that. Let me remember what you said.
So maybe you don't have to go too deep into this further. So one other suggestion would be to first map the nodes into a latent space as you do in other parts of your thesis, and then look at neighborhood structure in that latent space and then build a graph there. That would be perhaps a better alternative than the way you do it now. But let's move to the next question. So on page, so on chapter 5, so let's jump to chapter 5. You seem to do precisely the opposite. So here you destroy temporal ordering by using a transformer on a problem where time clearly contains valuable information.
Yeah.
And you argue that there is no preferred order in preparing dinner. However, there certainly seems to be a partial order in preparing dinner. For instance, you should not first add the mushrooms to the spaghetti sauce before cutting them into pieces. Believe me, I've tried it and it doesn't really work. If I'm not very good cook, I should say.
Yeah,
let me ask the question. So one sec. So if you wanted to restore temple partial order, how would you proceed?
It's a complex question. Let me digest it first.
Take your time.
So before answering, one of the reasons we did sparsely in learning the connections in the Videograph is that actually we are learning two tasks at the same time, none of which we have annotation for. We are learning the nodes and we are learning the edges. So as you said, it's a computational problem and it's a learning problem as well. So that's why we sparsified nodes. Now going to this next chapter, which we argued, according to your question, we argued the opposite. Can you guide me to a specific figure?
Figure, yeah. Yeah, maybe figure 31. There you can sort of clearly see how you use a max operator to remove ordering, I think.
Yeah. So it's okay.
So you treat time as a set in some sense, right?
Yeah, partially.
Or here you could have done a convolution, I think, but.
Yeah, actually, so can you please now repeat the question?
So yeah, so the question is, so I argue that the time dimension has partial ordering in it. So I agree with you that at the concept level, detailed order information is sort of destroyed, and there is many ways in which you can prepare dinner.
Yeah.
But there is actual ordering. It's a partial ordering, right?
Yeah.
So how would you restore partial ordering in your model?
Yeah, highly esteemed opponent, thanks very much again for another insightful and interesting question. I agree with you in the general conclusion that we give up on, at all costs in this chapter, on encoding order. That was maybe inspired by our frustration of how encoding order in the previous chapter, time section, helps, but not to our great expectations. So we were like a yo-yo, going from one extreme to another. From one extreme, encoding a very strict order using convolution in time section, all the way to the other extreme, which is giving up on the order altogether. So to answer your question in a very simple way, it looks to me that the ultimate or the most reasonable architecture solution is to balance the way between giving up on order and still encoding meaningful orders. So there must be a way to include both of them. Very detailed, yet very brief architecture for this is to have a temporal modeling layer that has both, that can learn both the unordered both the temporal information in unordered and ordered fashion, and you fuse both of them using, for example, self-attention.
Thank you.
So this would be my answer.
Great
Okay,
answer.
I hope that this was satisfactory.
Absolutely.
The truth is, as always, somewhere in the middle. Next opponent is Professor Snoek from our own institute.
Thank you. Esteemed candidate, let me congratulate you with your thesis as well. And I would also like to acknowledge your trajectory from the moment you stepped in to the UvA lab to the moment you step out today. I've seen you grow, and it was nice, nice to witness that. My first question is about figure 1. There you argue that time is the essence in a collection of images. That might be true if you do a future prediction, but in your case, you always classify the entire video, so you have access to all the frames. And for 4 out of the 5 frames, I could predict it is a high jump, easily. So the argument does not completely work in favor. And in fact, I think that time is not the essence of your thesis. Because figure 4 is probably more the essence of your thesis. And you have essentially shown that treating concepts or latent concepts as a set and bringing some order awareness into this set is very beneficial for long-range activity classification. Can you comment on that?
Highly esteemed opponent, I would like to personally thank you for complimenting my journey. And I would also like to thank you for this interesting this abstract, this question that captured the abstract behind the thesis. Very insightful indeed. I would like to politely and humbly disagree with you, because you mentioned that in figure 4, that the essence of the thesis is how do we recognize building blocks and argue that their order or reasoning, collective reasoning about them is the goal of the thesis. But if you continue further in this argument, you can discover that a concept or a building block does not appear out of the blue. It only appears when it is contrasted by the contexts. So let's say I give you a color, it does not shine up unless I give contrasting colors beside it in the context. So to further take this one step more, this is very much a property of time, that over time, only if you watch the entire thing, then you can only say, I see concept A, B, C. If you see each of these concepts in separate, I wouldn't think that it would be a very easy case for you or for the observer to tell that these are distinctive concepts. Furthermore,
may I interrupt you?
Yes.
I'm not against time, but then at least something is missing.
Yeah.
And that is the time of semantics.
Yeah.
That you have not stressed in your thesis, and that is the essence of all the algorithms you are proposing.
That's a great point you are making, highly esteemed opponent. I agree with you that we just touched on time by just exploring or poking a little bit of aspects or properties of it, but we yet don't have any fundamental or very strong grasp of what time exactly is meant in the videos. It's still something that I would argue will not only take many years to come to solve, but also many researchers to work on. So even though I ask myself, if time is represented a video as a succession of frames, what is time is represented in our minds, because ultimately the way we build models is heavily inspired by the way we understand time in our minds, not in the computer mind.
Okay, thank you.
So I completely agree with you that we might have been lucky to grasp one aspect of it, but of course we might not be met the same luck in understanding or grasping or even defining the other aspects.
Thank you. You convincingly demonstrate that timeception, Videograph, and PIC improve over alternatives on charades, breakfast, and multi-2MOS datasets. Now, I would expect that learning this order awareness or time comes with a price.
Yeah.
Right? And you demonstrate that in terms of additional complexity in the model, it is very modest, I would say. So that's good for you. Now I wonder, it has to hurt somewhere. So where does it hurt? So have you investigated for data sets when there is less training data available? When does the model collapse, right? Is there a minimum amount of labels that you need, and where are others still better? I would like to get a better understanding of the brittleness there.
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks again.
I hope you can give a concise answer.
Yeah, thanks for this question. My answer would be that each model was dedicated to only one property. So of course it excels at this property and fails in others. As you can see also from the entirety of the thesis, that we were short of proposing a model that grasp all the threads. So verily each model by itself has its own limitation. So give you an example. The models that encode temporal order or temporal structure are hungry to labels and hungry to learning examples, because if you do not provide them with training examples enough, they will hardly learn any temporal pattern. On the other hand, you have the models that does not learn temporal order at all. Of course, they exceed in some situations, like in highly chaotic, complex human activities, but they would fail where temporal pattern is very crucial, like in short-range activities. So to give a clear answer, for example, timeception is hungry for learning labels, for annotated data, because it has to learn a pattern, while in contrast, maybe PIC or Videograph less hungry to label data, but more prone to failure when it comes to videos with strict patterns like sports activities, for example.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to stop this part of the discussion at this point. I like to give the floor to the last opponent, Dr. Mettens from our own institute.
Thank you. Esteemed candidate, first of all, congratulations for the thesis. So where the field mostly is concerned with videos in the order of seconds, you dare to look what is beyond there. And I think that was a brave decision with the great results. With that, I have a first question, which is about definitions. So in the thesis, I've seen a great many definitions, including, I'm listing here, actions, events, atomic actions, complex actions, activities, in both in short range and long range. Can you explain how these definitions are connected and why we need all these different definitions?
Esteemed opponent, thanks very much for raising this very, very, very important question. I touched a little bit on this problem in the conclusion and said that, namely, more precisely, or rather the introduction of the. Yes, on page 16, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the second paragraph, you see bullet points. And the third bullet point is level of human motion. I don't have a concrete answer. What can we call them? We call them over time they are motion, or they are activities, or they are movements, or they are differences in frames or visual appearances. I don't have a concrete answer. But what I know for a fact is that the community is so much desperate for a research outcome that will define the exact borders of when each of these terms start and when to stop. I argued in this bullet point, what are the differences between atomic actions, unit actions, one action, action, activity, event, etc. So I completely agree with you. We are in the both line. We are in the same boat, that we are desperate for a good understanding of each of these themes, terms.
Thank you very much. And with that, I want to move to Videograph. And Videograph is, to me, an almost daunting endeavor, in that it is incredibly intricate. You have to do latent graph learning or manifold learning, if you are more traditional, representation learning, classification learning, everything given only inputs and labels. And my question is, why a fully sub-symbolic approach? And why not use symbolic knowledge? For example, the great example you give yourself, namely figure 21. So you give symbolic knowledge there in figure 21. Why not use it?
I see. Esteemed opponent, thanks again for the follow-up question. Sorry, thanks again for reading another question. I completely agree with you that it looks that Videograph is from the first look that we bite more than we can chew, in the sense that the model tries to learn many proxy tasks for the ultimate task of video classification. The reason we did so, I completely agree with you that another alternative is actually benefiting from previously learned tasks. Like, for example, instead of learning concepts as a proxy, why don't we benefit from learned concepts on previous data set by previous networks? That looks very plausible. The only downside of doing so, because it has already been done, is that you limit the model to the inductive bias of what have been learned on the previous data sets before. So to give you an example, what is a very good alternative of not learning in an unsupervised fashion concepts, latent concepts? A very good alternative is actually take a CNN that predicts objects, all right? And these objects then becomes the nodes. But then you fall in the trap of limiting yourself to only these objects. What if the data set in hand, the video data set in hand, had other objects that has not been defined before, or did not learn it by the previous object detector? You see what I'm saying? So both approaches has their own ups and downs. If you go fully unsupervised, you are open to whatever new concept in the data set in hand, but you fall short of learning maybe stronger representation. If you benefit from previous methods that have their own inductive bias and their representation, yes, you are better off using them, but then you limit yourself to what these networks have learned before. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I look at the chair to see if there's time for one more question.
Oh yes, you were supposed to wrap it up completely.
Okay, perfect.
Unless you don't want to do that.
Then I have one more question for the candidate. The second chapter is about more about semantics than time. in a way. So what lessons from chapters 3 to 6 can be used to improve zero exemplar recognition in chapter 2?
Esteemed opponent, that's a very interesting question, because from what I understand, what lessons can we learn or can we reflect from the previous chapters following the chapter 2 in order to improve what is happening in chapter 2? Very good question and very good observation that we overlooked the temporal dimension altogether in chapter 2. Maybe at the cost of expanding to other modalities. So you take some, you lose some, as they say. But to answer your question, what we can learn definitely is how to we incorporate temporal modeling for the sake of video representation in chapter 2. So chapter 2, the only video representation done is actually very simple max or average proof over the entire temporal dimension, with no attention paid to temporal modeling. So this is definitely something we can bring on the table from the previous chapters to chapter 2.
Hora est.
Thank you for this nice discussion. There remains nothing but to invite the esteemed candidate to greet his closing sentence.
Having thus concluded the defense of my thesis to the best of my ability, and pending the decision of the doctorate committee, I should like to express my sincere thanks to my highly esteemed supervisors, in particular, as well as to those who have so courteously brought forward their criticisms, and to all who have honored this ceremony with their presence.
Thank you. The committee will be retiring into a breakout room, and we will hopefully be coming back with a verdict soon.
And everybody is present again. Dear Chair, the floor is yours. And please unmute yourself.
Not used of getting back in muted shape. Sorry for that. Esteemed candidate, after due consideration of the thesis you have submitted, we have decided to grant you the doctoral degree. Professor Smulders is authorized to confer this dignity upon you in the customary fashion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I most willingly accept the task assigned to me by the Rector Magnificus of the University by virtue of the power conferred on us by law and in accordance with the decision of the Rector and the Doctorate Board of the University of Amsterdam. I hereby confer upon you, Noureldien Mahmoud El-Sayed Hussein, the degree of doctor, and I grant you all the rights pertaining thereto by law or custom. In evidence thereof, you will be presented at a later time with the degree certificate signed by the rector and the supervisors, confirmed with the Great Seal of the university. And Noor, I'm very happy to be the first one to be able to talk to you with the degree of doctor. I thought it was a very interesting discussion this morning, and I thank all the members of the committee full-heartedly for the depth of their questions, indicating there is a lifetime ahead of research to get over all these questions. Noor, I remember very well the piles of applications we had when we sent out the advertisement for this position. Some 400 people or so were applying for the positions we had in UvA. And you struck out because you had participated in a competition, and skillfully so. And for the topic at hand, building time machines, we could, to understand videos, we could see how someone who was actually participating in competitions would have the desire, intent, and the stamina to set a goal in this very complex topic, as we've seen this morning, and then reach it. So that was the quality we specifically selected for in your application. And you have not disappointed us one moment. At the end of the first year, you already successfully entered the world's largest conference with the most impact. So I'm particularly filled with pride for your competent completions. I have learned a lot from you about the pressures of being successful when you do not originate from our comfortable countries. That if you come from a different world, then the pressure under which you operate are very different from when you are used to the idea of getting into science all your life. I think you also learned a lot as well. You succeeded in getting into CVPR once more, and it could have been even 3 times if you would have been able to learn earlier to accept good advice. But I think that good advice is something you have to learn to accept rather than to do it upfront automatically. The worst thing about good advice to follow automatically is really a waste, I believe. And this brings me to the second topic I would like to discuss with you, where drive, ambition, and goal orientation were the grounds on which you were selected, and it will bring you somewhere. It is also important in life not to put it as the one single goal. I always advise people when they're older to put their ambition in work on the second important place in life. So there's always room to be that something else is the first goal. Choose your goals such that you can reach them relaxed, that 80% of the time. It's good to be occasionally stressed towards a goal or to definitely want to achieve it, but choose something else as the valve to stay out of that. There's nothing against hard work. I think I've done it all my life, but it is also important that it is not the only thing. At the same, so develop with your success and your strive to hard work, develop also the sense of being satisfied with your success. Have you, as you've scored so intensely, and enjoy it when it comes. You are learning Dutch now, and I take it as the ultimate sign that you have already listened to my advice before hearing it. Whatever languages you will learn in the future, whether it is our computer languages or the language of machine learning or the language of Dutch, I wish you all well, not only in the work, but in life in general. Keep me posted. And now Stratis will add to this.
Yeah, thank you, Arnold. Yeah, I will not say much more. It was a great pleasure and honor to work with you, and I remember with warmth our collaboration. I believe you wholeheartedly deserve this degree. You've matured through the years, definitely, as a person and scientifically, and that's, I think, the best outcome for somebody who does a PhD. I believe you're ready for your next step. And one thing that I believe is what also Arnold said, would be nice is to have less of binary definitions in your life, and less of black and white interpretations of reality, of your own work, of other people's works. It's going to save you melancholy that comes with such big gradients of change. You know? So yeah, this is it for me. Of course, my door will always be open, so I'll be happy to help any way I can from now on.
Having thus fulfilled the task assigned to me, I have the honor of being the first to address you as doctor and to congratulate you with the dignity conferred upon you. Oh, I think I've already said that one. And regard the obtained dignity as an honor and a privilege, and never forget the attendant responsibilities which you now bear towards science and society.
It is a very pleasant duty, most learned scholar, to congratulate you also on behalf of the doctorate board of the Universiteit van Amsterdam on this newly acquired honor. Before formally closing the session, I like to again to speak a word of thanks to the people who have made this possible. There is Professor Shah, who had to got up in a very early hour for him in order to contribute as the one opponent from outside the Netherlands. We had our Beadle who guarded the protocol, and you may not be aware of the fact that we actually had two technical people involved. Aside from Jasper Wagermans, I see that Tom van der Ploeg joined in order to solve some problem evidently with the YouTube channel. not the first time that has happened, but thanks a lot for getting it up during the course of the event. The previous time this happened in a defense where I was chairing, it took over 20 minutes to get it repaired, and we had to delay the entire ceremony for 20 minutes. So thanks a lot. This closes the official session, and we now have a short time for doing informal congratulations. Let me then start out myself, grabbing this opportunity. Reading your thesis made me think about what I have learned 50 years ago in concurrency theory. You have activities and you have an independence relations between them, and that gives rise to partial ordered structures. Evidently, you are trying to reverse this process. You have your videos which are linear ordered, but by having a multitude of them, you're trying to reduce it to a partial order and retrieve the independence relations from that. So, in that sense, it's just time in reversal. Think like a theoretician. I'm not sure whether you will do that much in your future career, but good luck with it. Who else? Let's do it in the order of opposition. Professor Shah.
Yes, I also want to join in congratulating you to get this degree. It is a big honor to get a degree from this so prestigious university, and especially the work you have done extensively and able to publish. And also want to congratulate you that the way you conducted the defense and the way you answer questions, it gave me an impression that you have already integrated in the Dutch tradition. It didn't look like that you are from Iran. Because, people won't distinguish between the way you dressed and the way you answer. So this is good training. Arnold and your co-advisor gave you, again, congratulations.
Dr. Habibayan.
Congratulations, Noor. Well done with the thesis. We have worked also during your internship in Qualcomm, and I have a bit of view about your high standards and your high ambitious and working hard to achieve. I think it will help you to continue doing great work, and especially if, as Arnold pointed out, by taking it in your advantage and making sure you leverage this attitude. And yeah, wish you success in the future in your career, and keep in touch.
So I'm really like to understand where you're from, because I just heard Professor Shah say Iran, but I don't recognize the Farsi accent that
Egypt.
Dr. Habibian has. So are you really from Iran or more from Egypt region?
Yeah, I was born in Egypt and I'm Egyptian.
Right. So it's Arabic that we hear.
Never been in Iran then?
It's hard, I think. But anyway, that's a different political discussion altogether. It was a really wonderful defense. I think I mentioned during the discussions that you are a true gentleman. You didn't forget even once to say esteemed opponent, where this happens a lot with nervous students who are defending. I see Annemarie nodding. So this is happening a lot. So you took your time to answer your questions, and also I really appreciated that you actually answered the question that was asked and not circled around it. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to read your thesis, and I wish you all the best in your future career. If you stay around, since you learned Dutch, knock on our door a lot, and maybe one day we will collaborate.
Kees.
Yes, Noor, you are allowed to smile with the achieved dignity. Congratulations. A great achievement. It was clear that this was going to happen for a while already. I really like the work you did, very refreshing. And it's sort of like I'm thirsty for more. So I'd like to encourage you to continue. And in that process, I wish you a lot of wisdom.
You'll have more in half an hour. Not from this candidate.
Well, what can I say?
No, we still have Dr. Mattis.
Hi, Noor. So something I didn't mention in the defense itself is that your thesis reached the highest honor in our household, which is that it was debated at the dinner table. I can tell you not many papers make it that far. So do that as you will, but that's something I still wanted to mention. So in a way, I don't envy the new generation of UvA seeing your thesis and saying, well, good luck with the next generation. I think they have a big task on their hands. And I think your thesis will be a great starting point, but also a scary one because so much already done. And as you still already said, still so much to do. I wish you good luck. I think it was a great defense, great thesis. I enjoyed every minute of it. And don't forget to celebrate.
Okay, Dr. Hussein, as you will presumably have understood, a large number of the people in your committee will have to reconvene some 10 minutes from now for another PhD defense. So we will leave you in the company of the beadle who will do some practical arrangements with you about how to transfer documents which still have to be signed. And that's a hassle at this time where the offices typically are closed and people are not allowed to enter offices and things like that. But we'll be informed at some point when I invite to sign a whole pile of documents which must have gathered since the last time I had the opportunity of signing some of those. So have a good time, enjoy yourself. Thanks to all the people present. I'm taking a short sanitary and I will reconvene as fast as possible for the other session, which is on a different channel. Good luck to all of you.
Okay, thank you. Noor, if you can stay for a bit, then I can tell you some practical details. All others are also welcome to remain in this session if you're not in a hurry to go into the next session. Noor, I will send you a message via email next week with the download link of the recordings. It's a little bit different than normally because the live stream got a hiccup, but I'm sure my colleagues will make it up somehow. And I will send you also the so-called PhD statement, which is proof that you have defended your thesis and you have been granted a doctorate degree. And at